Hello folks, welcome to the Edupedia world and I am Abhinay Gupta. Today again we'll continue with the topic, the meeting of the board and its powers. Right? So in the immediate preceding lecture, we had covered an important topic that was section 177, the audit committee. So today what we'll discuss is the questions that are based on the audit committee that have been asked in your past year examinations, and also the next section, that is section 178. The Nomination and Remuneration Committee and the Stakeholder Relationship Committee, right? So before going to the questions on section 177, the Audit Committee, let us give 2 minutes to briefly discuss as to what was the provisions of the section 177. So in section 177, the Audit Committee, we saw that the Audit Committee is constituted by the Board of Directors. Right, and in which company? It is constituted in all the listed companies and the prescribed companies. And prescribed companies are the same companies for which, to whom an independent director, an appointment of an independent director is also compulsory. Right, therefore section 149 also applies to the same company. So in both the sections 179 and 177, the prescribed companies are the same companies, and they are those public companies who have a paid up share capital of rupees 10 crores or more, or they have annual turnover of rupees 100 crores or more, or they have an aggregate of the outstanding loan or borrowing or debentures or deposits which exceeds rupees 50 crores. Right? So if there is a public limited company that surpasses these deadlines, right? So these are the bandwidth. Above them, the provisions of 149 and 177 are applicable, and below them, you are not compulsorily required to follow the provisions of these two sections, right? So the listed companies and the public companies beyond the certain limit will have to appoint an independent director, and over here they will have to constitute an audit committee, right? And the total number of directors in an audit committee will not be less than 3. And majority of them should be independent director. So if you have 3 directors, 2 have to be independent, right? The only provision is that you should have a majority of independent director. More than 50% directors should be independent. They can be, and then the company may have MD, whole-time director, and any other director, right? And then we also saw that majority of the directors in the committee, including the chairman, should have the ability to read and understand the financial statements, because they are dealing with the auditors, right? And auditors are there basically to analyze and review and provide assurance on the financial statements, right? So when you have a committee that is specifically designed for the audit purpose, to go in hand with the audit purpose, for the reviews, for support, for other matters that relates to audit, so you will have to indulge over there the directors who have an experience, right, who actually have the ability to read and understand the financial statements, because that is where they have to deal with the auditors, right? And then we also saw some basic functions of the audit committee, that they actually recommend, right, the appointment, remuneration and the term of the auditor. They review and monitor the independence, the performance and the effectiveness of the audit process that are followed by the auditors. They examine the financial statement, since they have the ability to do that, and they also examine the auditor's report, right? Then they also approve the section 188 transaction, that is the related party transactions are approved by the audit committee. They scrutinize the intercorporate loans and investment. They perform the valuation of the undertaking and the assets, and they also evaluate the internal control and the RMS, that is the risk management system, and they also monitor the use of the fund raised through the public offer. So these are the basic functions of the audit committee. Then after that, we saw the powers of the audit committee, that they have the power to call the comment of the auditors on the internal control, on the scope, on the observation and on the review of the financial statement, right? And they can also discuss the issue with the internal or the statutory auditor and the management of the company. And for performing the various functions of the audit committee, they have the full access to the records of the company, right? And they may also obtain professional advice wherever they feel convenient, wherever they feel the need of it, right? And if we talk about the roles of the auditor, then the auditor and the key managerial persons in the company, they have the right to be heard in the audit committee meeting, although they will have no right to vote for the resolution over there, right? Then the board report should also disclose the composition of the audit committee and the recommendations of the audit committee. They'll also disclose the recommendations of the audit committee that are not accepted, and along with the reason as to why weren't those recommendations accepted, right? And then finally, they will also establish a vigil mechanism. You know what a vigil mechanism is? It is a mechanism which actually helps the directors and the employee to report genuine concern directly to the chairman or the director in the case where there is no audit committee, right? Then the board appoints a director to take the position of the audit committee. So it is a mechanism that is designed for the director and the employee to reach out to them for genuine concerns, right? So that was the brief about the audit committee. Now we move on to the questions. So basically, if you look at your past examinations, right, then although this section has not been asked very frequently in the examination, but if we flip to the past question papers, we have found this to have appeared 4 times, right? That is in 2002, 2003, 2007 and 2008. And all the 4 times, the only question they asked was to draft a resolution, right? A resolution for the constitution of the audit committee. So all that you have read, you have not been asked very typical questions to analyze or a case study so far, right? Because actually the case study pattern is not very old. And since the case study pattern has started, you haven't had any question from this section. But before that, you had the similar kind of a question to draft a resolution for the constitution of the audit committee, right? And with the question, when the institute asks you the question, they specify that you will have to include the provisions for the members of the audit committee, the chairman of the audit committee, the quorum of the meeting of the audit committee, and 2 main functions of the committee, for example. This was the question of 2003. Right? So you are asked those kind of questions. You have to draft an entire resolution, right? So if you are asked a question to draft a resolution, you should know the format of the resolution that you are supposed to draft. So in our previous lectures, we have already seen how to draft certain resolutions, right, for appointment of alternate directors and for some other specific purposes. So basically, you know that whenever you are asked to draft a resolution in your examination, there are 3 basic contents for the start of the resolution. That is the subject, the passing authority, and the nature of the resolution. So over here, the subject of the resolution would be the constitution of the audit committee. The passing authority, as we have discussed, is the board of directors, and the nature of the resolution would be a resolution by simple majority. That is actually the nature of resolution in all the board meetings, unless and until the article otherwise provides. And the article can provide for passing of a unanimous resolution for all the decisions taken in the board meeting, right? We have discussed that already in our previous lectures. So again, you know that a resolution basically starts with the word resolved, right? So over here also you will start resolve that pursuant to section 177 of the Companies Act 2013. Content have to be according to the question, right? So you start resolve that pursuant to section 177 of the Companies Act 2013. Consent be and is hereby given for the constitution of an audit committee consists of the following directors, and then you give the list of the directors, right? Along with the name of the director, you also specify his position, whether he is a managing director, an independent director, a non-executive director, or who is that person, right? Along with the name, you will give his resignation. Then you start the second paragraph. You know that all the continuation paragraphs would begin with the word further resolved. So you write that, further resolved that the chairman of the audit committee shall be elected by the members of the committee from amongst themselves and shall attend the annual general meeting, right? Then again, as per the question, you also have to write about the other points. So these points, these paragraphs that you include will be specific to the questions that has been asked in your examination, right? So you would include further resolved that the quorum of the committee shall be 1/3 of the total number of its members, or 2 directors, whichever is higher. So the quorum of the meeting, the board meeting is 1/3 or 2, right? So the quorum of the audit committee will also be the same. Then you write further resolved that the committee shall have the authority to investigate into any matter, right, as prescribed under section 177 or referred to it by the board. And for this purpose, it shall also access to information contained in the records of the company and to seek external professional advice if necessary. Right? This was the point that we discussed after we discussed the power of the audit committee. So this was the 6th point of our discussion. Right? Then the question had asked you to specify 1 or 2 functions. So you write, further resolve that the committee shall perform the following functions, and then jot down any 2 functions. Right? Like recommendation for the appointment, remuneration of the auditor, examination of the financial statement or the auditor's report, or any other function of your choice. Right? Then you include whether or not requested in the question that further resolved that the recommendation of the committee on any matter relating to the financial management, including the auditor's report, shall be binding on the board unless the board records the reason for not accepting the same recommendation. Right? Then further resolved that the committee shall meet at least 4 times a year. Further resolved that the company secretary be and is hereby authorized to act as the coordinator and facilitator for the smooth functioning of the audit committee. So I basically read out the resolution that you would be drafting, and the basic purpose was for you to focus on the language that I used. Right? So basically there are 2-3 key words that you have to put in mind and jot down in the paper. Rest is your answer. Rest is your language. Rest is the provision of the act. So the first 3 things that you have to keep in mind is the subject, passing authority, and the nature of resolution. Then you know that every paragraph will start with the word further resolved. Only the first paragraph will be started with the word resolved, and this word will be in capital letters. Right? And try to understand and use the sentences that are given in the resolution basically, because that are actually the formal statements. Right? Like the first paragraph that we discussed, resolved that pursuant to section 177 of the Act 2013, consent be and is hereby given for the constitution of an audit committee consisting of the following directors. So these words, consent be and is hereby given. Right? So these are actually the words that you use while you draft a resolution. So try to use these words as it is. That will give a good impression on the checker, on the person who is evaluating your answer sheet. Because whenever he gets these kind of statements, these kinds of words used in the answer sheet, he automatically understands that the student is prepared. The student knows the answer very well. Right? So this will also give you a bonus for the questions that he will be evaluating further. He will always have that impression that yes, this student is a studious student and he actually goes by the text. He has paid attention to what he has studied. So his answers will be up to a certain standard. Right? So there you may get a leniency, you may get an edge above the other students who write a plain language of their own. Right? Trust me, when people don't know how to write a resolution, they just go on writing the answers. Okay, we had studied, these are the provisions in the Act. They simply jot down the provision. They don't even write the first 3 elements, the subject, the passing authority, and the nature of resolution. Somewhere they have read the word resolved, further resolved, and they don't know how to use it, and they go on using it. Right? Most of the students do like that. But it's better that when you're going for your examination, you be prepared. And be rest assured that you may get a resolution in your examination too. Because recently in 2014-2015, you have been asked questions. Right? You have been asked to draft resolutions in your examination. So if you get to draft a resolution in your examination, you should not be surprised with that. Right? So that was all. Because one example, you had the similar kind of question for all the 4 times that you have been asked a question from this section. Right? So moving on to the next section. The next section is section 178, the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. So the Nomination and Remuneration Committee is constituted by the Board of Directors of the listed company and the prescribed companies. And it is needless to mention that these are the same prescribed companies that are carried in the provisions of section 149 for the Independence Director and section 177 for the Audit Committee. Right? So section 149, section 177 and section 178, all 3 have the same prescribed companies. Right? So any public company that crosses this bandwidth will have to appoint independent directors, will have to constitute an audit committee, and will also have to constitute the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. Right? So this is the requirement. And for all the listed companies, these are all already a mandate. Right? So once again we'll revise what are these prescribed companies. They are those public companies who have a turnover of more than equal to 10 crores, 100 crores. They have the paid up share capital of more than equals to 10 crores, and they have an aggregate of the outstanding loan, borrowing, debentures or deposits exceeding rupees 50 crores or more, right? And these criteria will be judged as per the last financial statement. To be precise, the last audited financial statement, right? And every company to which these provisions of section 178 are applicable will have to constitute a nomination and remuneration committee within a period of 1 year. Now, from where will this 1 year be checked? This 1 year will be checked from the date of appointment of independent directors, or from the date when the Rule 6 came into force, when the Rule 6 became applicable, right? So whichever is earlier, from that date to the next 1 year. Before that, you will have to appoint the nomination and remuneration committee, right? Again, in the nomination and remuneration committee also, you will have a minimum of 3 directors, right? But these will be 3 non-executive directors. So you will have to have 3 or more non-executive directors in the remuneration and nomination committee, right? And then not less than 1/2 of the members of the nomination remuneration committee shall be independent directors, right? So not less than 1/2. That means again we mean to say that the majority of the directors should be independent director, as we had seen the case in the audit committee, right? Over here, the chairperson of the company, the chairman of the company, right? Whether he's executive, whether he's non-executive, that is not our business to judge. But whosoever is the chairperson of the company, he is qualified to become a director in the nomination and remuneration committee also, right? But he would not be allowed to chair the committee, right? So this is important thing to understand, that the chairman of the company cannot chair the nomination and remuneration committee. He can anyways be a member of this committee. Now basically we need to understand what is the need of a nomination and remuneration committee, right? What are their functions? What do they do? So basically the nomination and remuneration committee shall identify the person in the company who are qualified for being into their board of directors, person who are qualified for the directorship, and also who are qualified for their senior management position. So senior management includes everybody in the management excluding the board of directors, right? So other than the board of directors, all the people who are at the senior most position of the company, who actually deal with the management of the company, are considered to be the senior management. So the nomination and remuneration committee, the word nomination in the name of the committee itself signifies that this is their function. They are supposed to nominate the directors and the senior management person. They will nominate the director and the board will appoint them. So they basically identify these people and recommend them to the board for their appointment as well as their removal, right? And they also perform the performance appraisal of the board, right? They carry out the evaluation of every director's performance, right? Every director into the board. The performances are evaluated by the nomination and remuneration committee. Further, it may also, or it shall actually, formulate the criteria, and the criteria for determining the qualification, the positive attribute and the independence of the director, right? So how do you actually judge the qualification? What are the procedures based on which you will identify the independence of the director? Those criteria are also laid down by the nomination and remuneration committee. Then the other functions of the nomination and remuneration committee would include a recommendation to the board, right? So they would recommend to the board the policy that the board should follow for determining the remuneration of the directors and the key managerial personnel, right, as well as the employees of the company. And then the board would also disclose such policy into the board's report. And while the nomination and remuneration committee is drafting such a policy, right, while they are forming such a policy, they should ensure that the remuneration that they are providing to the directors or the employees should be reasonable and sufficient. And they should be reasonable and sufficient to attract, motivate and retain the directors, employees or other personnel right, for the successful running of the business. Whatever level they are required. If you require a highly experienced, highly qualified, a professional director, then you will have to pay him more, right? So his pay scale should be reasonable according to that. But if for some specific task you don't require such a highly qualified or highly experienced director, right, a beginner or amateur or a middle level, the layer 2 directors, even they can be enough for that. So at that point of time, you reasonably assure that yeah, we can hire a director within these bandwidth, right? So accordingly you will have to decide, right? So you will form a policy based on these things, right? A policy that would ensure that the remuneration that you are giving is reasonable and sufficient. You are not going extravagant with your pay scales, right? So that is what has to be sought for by the nomination and the remuneration committee, right? And then the remuneration that they are paying should also be proportional to the performance. So while they are actually discussing the performance appraisal of the directors, while they are formulating policies for that, right? So at the end of the year, when they are appraising, when they are giving the performance appraisal to the directors, they have to keep in mind the performance level of those directors. So the remuneration that they finally decide to pay off to any director should be directly proportional to their performance. If they're performing good, they should be paid more, and if they're not performing very well, then their pay scale should be slashed down proportionately, and it should be clear to meet the appropriate performance benchmark, right? And then when you decide a policy, when you formulate a policy for the remuneration of the director, key managerial person, the senior management, you should make sure that there is a balance between the fixed and the incentive portion, right? A fixed and an incentive portion that would reflect the short and long term performance objective of those personnel, of those directors, right? Because if you do not give them an incentive, for example, there's a director who is paid rupees 2 lakhs per month. So irrespective of his work, irrespective of his performance, if you fix a slab that yeah, we'll be paying him 2 lakhs per month, so that director will not be motivated to work for the company, right? Because anyways he will be paid the check, the paycheck will come to him at the end of the month, that is worth rupees 2 lakhs. But if you divide it, suppose for at the end of the year you are supposed to give him a package of 24 lakhs, but you can divide it. You can say that yeah, 16 lakh would be your fixed element that you'll be getting, but the remaining 8 lakhs would be variable as per your performance. So these are the various performance rating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you step in number 5, which is the worst performance, then we give you say 1 lakh from that. If you step in 4, then we give you 2 lakhs from that. If you step in 3, we give you 4 lakhs. If you step in number 2, we give you 6, and if you step in number 1, we give you 8 lakhs. So that is how you should actually formulate your remuneration for the higher level management. That will actually motivate and instigate them to work more, to bring more business to the company. Because if they are working well, if they're performing very well and they're getting a good rating, because the nomination and remuneration committee itself again does their performance appraisal. So if they're giving them a good rating and they're getting good rating at the end of the year, they get a good money to take back home, right? Rather than if they are just paid 24 lakhs flat irrespective of their performance, then obviously they will not be motivated. They have nothing to look forward to. They have nothing to fight for. So that is what you need to keep in mind while you are deciding or drafting a policy for your remuneration, right? So that is all about the remuneration and the nomination committee. Actually, the nomination and the remuneration committee. Okay? And the final thing that you should keep in mind, that the chairperson of the nomination and remuneration committee also has the authority or also has the right to attend the general meeting. And if he is not present, any other member from the nomination and remuneration committee can go and attend the general meeting of the shareholders, right? So that will be all for the lecture today. We have covered a brief review of section 177, the audit committee. We have discussed the type of questions that have been asked in the previous examinations, right? Which is basically the drafting of the resolution. We have discussed the resolution. We have read out a resolution for you. And then we have discussed the provisions of section 178. Right? We have discussed the provisions of the nomination and remuneration committee, but there is another part of 178 that deals with the shareholders relationship committee, right? That will be continuing in the next lecture, and then we'll also discuss the questions based on these sections, right? So until then, this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. Stay tuned for the next lecture. Thank you. Bye-bye.